A Super Bowl winning coach becomes available. Surely the Jets will be interested, right? Well, maybe not. Let's explore today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, on today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin with our first question from Taylor. John, would you want the Jets to hire Mike McCarthy? And why in the world do you think they have ruled it out? My personal theory is the headline-chasing Woody Johnson did not see it as a flashy enough move. What are your thoughts? So if you haven't been following, there's been quite a saga going on in Dallas with their head coach, Mike McCarthy, and finally it's been resolved. McCarthy's contract ran out at the end of the season, so there was all this drama. Would the Cowboys bring him back or let his contract expire? And it sounds like McCarthy is not returning, so McCarthy is essentially a free agent. He can now speak with any team out there. And there have been reports from local Jets beat writers that the Jets will not be interested in Mike McCarthy. McCarthy's a bit of a difficult evaluation because he's a coach with a .600 career winning percentage who is widely not believed to be that great of a coach. And he's been an NFL head coach for 18 years. He was a head coach with Green Bay, head coach in Dallas. He won a Super Bowl back in 2010. But yes, the average fan, they'll tell you Mike McCarthy's not that great of a coach. Mike McCarthy comes with some issues. The number one issue, I think, is he's a guy he seems very slow to adapt to trends offensively in the NFL. He's an offensive-oriented coach for much of it, not his entire career, but for much of his career, he's handled the play calling duties. But he has not been a guy who's been at the cutting edge. In fact, he's been one of the latest adapters of offensive trends. And this leads to his offense frequently being viewed as stagnant. It was true near the end of his tenure in Green Bay. It was true during his late in his tenure in Dallas. The other thing with McCarthy is that he's always been handed very, very talented teams. His teams in Green Bay were always very well built. So obviously, Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, but those teams were always talented. And then Dallas, for much of his tenure there, he had one of the most talented rosters in the league. And there's a school of thought that, he should have won more than one Super Bowl with those players, which I think it's always a little bit unfair when you blame a coach for only winning one Super Bowl, because there are a lot of really good coaches in this league who haven't even won one Super Bowl, who have also had a lot of talent. McCarthy has his flaws. I think we all know that. I think we know he's not the greatest coach in the league, but here's how I view it. The Jets have made a big deal out of, we're casting a wide net, where we're speaking to every coach available under the sun. And to be honest with you, I don't dislike that approach. I've heard mixed reviews for that approach. Some people really dislike it. Some people really like it. I'm positive on it. I think there's value in getting all sorts of different perspectives, meeting with all sorts of different candidates. Sometimes an unconventional candidate is actually a really good fit for your team. That said, I mean, you look at some of the coaches the Jets have interviewed. They're ultimately, every coach you interview, there is a time commitment. You are costing yourself time. So you don't want to waste time on candidates who really have no shot. The Jets have deemed Mike Locksley, a guy who spent his entire career in college football, a guy who, as a head coach, has never finished better than fourth place in his conference and division. They viewed him as a guy worth spending time with, that an investment in time interviewing this guy is worthwhile. They have spoken with Rex Ryan, a coach who had great success his first 2 years with the Jets, but after that, did not do very good job. Ended his head coaching career with six straight losing seasons. Has not even coached, not even as an assistant, not on any level, not pro, not college, any level, in 8 years. They think that these are guys who are worth speaking to. These are guys worth investing time in. And then, other guys like Arthur Smith or Matt Nagy, coordinators who were head coaches recently and had unsuccessful tenures. These guys are worth investing time to interview in. Yet a Super Bowl winning coach who's been an NFL head coach for 18 years with a 600 winning percentage, that guy would be a waste of time to speak to. That's where you lose me. And what I would say is that Mike McCarthy may not be the greatest coach in the league, but what do the Jets need more than anything right now? They just need somebody who can go in and instill professionalism. And while you can debate, did Mike McCarthy underachieve to an extent with those teams? One thing that's indisputable is that he's a proven head coach in this league. And maybe he should have done better certain seasons, but I just don't think you can have a 600 winning percentage in 18 years as an NFL head coach and be a bad coach. You may not be a great coach. Maybe you got lucky with your talent some of the years, but I don't think you can be like a bad coach and constantly win, because you're not holding the players. You're not holding your team back if you're winning consistently. They're always they're the coaches that improve the teams, like your Andy Reids of the world, your Kyle Shanahan's, where you objectively see how they make the team better. Sean McVay. There are coaches who are just so bad that they drag you down. Adam Gase is a good example of that. And then you have your guys who are just like kind of okay. And I think McCarthy, you make a strong case. McCarthy's in this kind of the okay. He's not going to like move the needle that much in the positive direction, but he's not going to actively hurt the team. And that's kind of what the Jets need right now. The Jets need somebody in there who's just going to like run a professional operation, instill some order into this team. And a guy who's been an NFL head coach for 18 years would do that. And say what you will about Mike McCarthy. There's no question he's a head coach. There are certain guys who are coordinators. And we've seen this with the Jets, where they constantly hire these assistant coaches, these guys who are better suited to be coordinators than head coaches. Jets are always hiring coordinators to be head coaches. Mike McCarthy is a head coach. He could come in and give you give you to a large extent what you needed, even if he doesn't have the cutting edge offense. So I look at like what the candidate list is. I think that there are a lot of very uninspiring candidates who the Jets have spoken with. And I think that the list overall, despite the number of people they've spoken with a few exceptions, is pretty underwhelming. I don't see how you wouldn't be interested, at least speaking to Mike McCarthy. So I don't know why it is, because again, the Jets, it's not like the Jets have been exclusive with their list. The Jets have made a big deal out of where we're speaking with everybody. So I can't tell you why that is, Taylor. I mean, maybe it's not, maybe he wouldn't be a big enough splash for Woody. Maybe Taylor's theory is correct, but I don't really understand it. Next question is from Charlie from Scranton. The more I learn about Aaron Glenn, the more I see him as a potential head coach for the Jets. But with the likelihood of the Lions going very deep into the playoffs, perhaps the Super Bowl, are they facing a similar situation when it seemed like they were settling for Todd Bowles because they could not afford to wait for Dan Quinn to become available because his team made the Super Bowl? So Charlie's referring to the 2015 coaching search, and Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks at that point. And teams cannot officially hire a coach until that coach's season's over. So if you're an assistant coach, your team's season needs to end before you can accept a head coaching job officially. Back in 2015, Quinn's team went to the Super Bowl. The Jets hired Todd Bowles before Quinn officially became available. The thing, Charlie, though, is my understanding of the way that worked was that Quinn made it clear he was going to Atlanta. Because they had Matt Ryan. Atlanta was a better job than the Jets at that point because Atlanta had Matt Ryan, a franchise quarterback in his prime. I don't think it was because the Jets refused to wait for him. I think my understanding is that it was made clear that Quinn was just going to the Falcons. This actually used to be a really big issue, maybe like 20 years ago, because you have to start hiring your assistants. Assistants, once a coach gets hired, once the first team hires its head coach, the best assistants start flying off the shelves. So there used to be like 20 years ago, if you hired a head coach, you had to wait till after the Super Bowl to hire a head coach. There really wouldn't be many good assistant coaches left. What's happened since then is teams and coaching candidates have learned. So I'm sure like what Aaron Glenn has done is Aaron Glenn has kind of gotten commitments from assistant coaches across the league. Like, hey, I can't officially sign with my team until the Lions season's over. But after I get this head coaching job, I want you to join me. And I think like they have like these informal agreements. So I don't think if like the Jets pass on Aaron Glenn, it's going to be because they would have to wait till after the Super Bowl, because you can have a handshake deal. The Jets could agree to with Aaron Glenn. When the Lions season's over, you're a head coach. And that's actually what happened with Rex Ryan back in 2009. Baltimore went to the AFC Championship game that year, and the Jets and he had agreed that he was going to be the head coach. And as the story goes, actually, after Baltimore lost the AFC Championship game to Pittsburgh, the Jets called him in the locker room in Heinz Field and offered him the job. So I think like if the Jets want Aaron Glenn, they will make it clear, like when the Lions season's over, we're going to offer you the job, and Glenn will line up his coaching staff. And I don't think that that's a major concern. Here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's keep talking about Aaron Glenn. And There's one candidate out there he keeps getting compared with. It's former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores. Which coach is better? It's tough to say. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets make every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Of course, the Jets are not in the playoffs this year, so you don't have to worry about losing money because the Jets lose. It's always a double whammy when you put money down on the Jets and they lose. You don't have to worry about that. You can get in on the action on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com today and get started with $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. It's hard to believe that the Jets or any other team would seriously consider Brian Flores after his antics in Miami. On the other hand, Aaron Glenn gets universal rave reviews. I know you think Tomlin is the best possible choice, but would the Jets really pursue Flores over Glenn? I'm not sure I agree with the question. Aaron Glenn, he gets universal rave reviews. I mean, lots of coaches get rave reviews. I mean, pretty much any coordinator who moves to a head coaching job has a lot of praise. I don't think either guy is a lock to be successful or a failure. If the Jets hired Brian Flores, I think he could succeed. I think he could fail. If the Jets hired Aaron Glenn, I think he could succeed. I think he could fail. Neither of these guys is a lock. I don't think there was any lock available in this cycle. There was nobody like Jim Harbaugh last year where you knew he'd step in and it'd be successful and it was guaranteed. There's no, Bill Parcells in 1997 when the Jets got him. I was pretty clear through the process before he went to New England that Mike Vrabel was the top choice of mine. But I thought there was a scenario where the Jets could hire Vrabel and it could go poorly. I didn't even think he was a lock. I'm not sure what antics you're referring to in Miami. I know that there was a lot of buzz about Flores not being terribly popular with a lot of the players. And, Tua Tagovailoa gave this interview that's been circulated around social media about how he hated Brian Flores. And recently Ryan Fitzpatrick gave an interview where he really bashed Flores. That stuff matters to an extent. But, you think about like every coach has question marks. And, like Aaron Glenn's question mark is like with any coordinator, will he actually be able to transition to being a good head coach? And the answer to that is unclear, as it is with any coordinator. You can be the greatest coordinator in the league. You can have everybody talking you up. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed. With Flores, we saw that maybe the players don't love him. And that matters to an extent. I'm not saying it's irrelevant. I'm not saying it's not a concern. But we've seen him as a head coach, and the results are the results. And I think it's fair to say that in all three of those seasons, he either matched or even exceeded expectations with the Miami Dolphins. The bigger concern I have with Flores is that in Miami, he really struggled with the offensive coordinator. He went through 3 guys in 3 years, and they never really established an offensive identity. That concerns me more than the relating to the players. But there's talk that, he and Josh McCown are going to be a tandem deal, that McCown, who's the Vikings quarterbacks coach, who pretty much everybody thinks is going to be a coaching star, will come with Flores to be the offensive coordinator wherever he lands. And that would alleviate probably the biggest issue Flores had in Miami. With Glenn, we don't know who his offensive coordinator is going to be. So I think it's difficult to separate these two. I don't know that I would necessarily agree that Glenn is a slam dunk choice over Flores. Because Glenn comes with an awful lot of question marks himself. And the other thing with Flores is I think Flores is a better defensive coordinator. I mean, I think that, he's one of the best defensive minds in the league. I don't know how much that matters becoming a head coach, but you are bringing in a guy who really understands how to run a defense. Not that Glenn doesn't, but I think if you look at Flores' body of work versus Glenn's, Flores is more impressive. Unless you're talking about maybe antics is Flores suing the league, but I mean, I don't know why any fan would care about that. It's about winning games. Flores suing the league or not suing the league isn't going to win or lose games for the Jets. That's not something like that's not something I concern myself with. I don't think either of these candidates is like a slam dunk one over the other. I think they both, have potential. I loved Aaron Glenn as a player. I don't know that like Glenn's career with the Jets should actually make a difference in this, but I think Aaron Glenn was a great player for the Jets. A few years back they did one of their anniversary teams, and Glenn was one of the corners that was chosen for the Jets. I think it was the Jets' 60th anniversary team. Glenn was one of the corners chosen, so he was a great player with the Jets. Has ties with the franchise, but I don't know. I mean, I think Flores. I don't understand the passion people have against Flores. I understand like reasons why you wouldn't want him to be the head coach. Again, the struggles with the offense in Miami. I think I'm not as worried about the relating to the players. I understand why people would be concerned with that. But in a process where the Jets are like interviewing people like Matt Nagy and Arthur Smith, it's difficult for me to like look at this list and say like Flores is like the guy that must be avoided because he's probably one of the better candidates out there. So is Glenn. I think either of these guys could be good. I don't think there's a lot separating them. I certainly don't think that Aaron Glenn is a lock where Brian Flores is not. Our next question: with the Vikings lost to the Rams and the poor performance of the defense, does this make Aaron Glenn the favorite for the Jets job over Flores? I'll say this: it should not play that big of a role. Sometimes it does. Sometimes like teams overanalyze the results of one game, but you have to look at the body of work and you have to look at like the traits these people are bringing to the table, not the performance of one game. Like Flores is a great defensive coach, and if you have concerns over his defense, it shouldn't be because he had one bad night in Arizona against the Rams. It does happen. I mean, so you see it every year. Like some coach springs some playoff surprise, whether it's some coordinator, whether it's an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, their team pulls some big upset, and suddenly that coach becomes really hot. And sometimes this stuff does matter. But, the Washington Commanders are playing this weekend, one of the surprise teams of the year. Their head coach is Dan Quinn, a first-year head coach. Last year, he was the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. Do you know how his unit performed in the playoffs? In one playoff game, the Cowboys were upset by the Green Bay Packers. Since the playoffs expanded to 7 teams in each conference, the Cowboys are the only 2 seed to lose to a 7 seed. That happened last year. The Packers scored 48 points in that game against Dan Quinn's defense. Overreacting to one game one way or another is not a good idea. Look, if Detroit comes out and gets torched and their defense gets torched this weekend, does it really make Aaron Glenn a worse candidate? I would say no. If the Lions lose and the Lions lose in the championship game or the Super Bowl and their defense plays poorly, does that mean the Jets should automatically stay away from Aaron Glenn? No. When a player has a good game, when Zach Wilson had that game against Houston in 2023, did that make Zach Wilson a great quarterback because he had one great game? No. Does a guy having like it's Garrett Wilson having a bad game, early in the season against Denver, does that make him a bad receiver? No. But when it comes to these coaching candidates, sometimes we like overestimate how much a single game sample size really matters. And it just should not matter as much as people make it out to. Again, sometimes like owners are swayed by one game. There are coaches who have like based a candidacy on one performance, one specific playoff game that they devised a game plan for as a coordinator. But I don't think it should be that way. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about analytics. Would Woody Johnson actually hire a GM with an analytical background? Is Woody smart enough to do that? I think that's the wrong question. I'll explain what the right question is as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. LinkedIn Jobs is a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. With the Jets' struggles with this coaching search for a GM, maybe the Jets should turn to LinkedIn. Jets have turned to the 33rd team. Maybe the 33rd team should use LinkedIn to help them out. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question is from Dan. Do you really think an owner who says thinking is overrated is going to make a progressive signing at GM focused on analytics? I'm a Yankee fan, and I think part of the reasons the Yankees are so analytical is because Hal Steinbrenner is very analytical. He understands the analytics and therefore evaluates it in the team strategy and analysis. Woody strikes me as the opposite of that. I seriously doubt he'd go down the analytics route for a GM hire. Oh, man. You know, it's bad when Hal Steinbrenner is getting praised. But I guess compared to Woody Johnson, maybe Hal Steinbrenner should be praised. Do I think Woody Johnson would hire an analytical GM? I do think he would. The question is, would Woody Johnson? I don't think the question is like, would Woody Johnson hire a GM with an analytics background? I think the question is, would Woody Johnson stick with that GM if the going got tough? Because the thing with Woody is like, he signs on for plans. He thinks that they're great. And then the first time there's a bump in the road, he changes his mind. You know, like listen to like any Woody Johnson press conference from early in any season. He's talking about the GM's plan. In fact, there's a good chance he's like parroting some of the GM's talking points because we know Woody doesn't really have any original football thoughts. So he tells them he's pretty much just repeats whatever the GM says. What happens though is when the Jets lose a couple of games or when the Jets have a bad season, that's where Woody like starts to throw out the plan. And you know, this is something I discussed yesterday. It's really hard to win in the NFL, but you have to have like a plan. And the toughest thing in the league is when things don't go right. You know, what's the old line? What's the old Mike Tyson line? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. It's true in the NFL. Everybody like has these detailed plans. You know, every new coach, every GM, they know how their team's going to succeed. In fact, this is like one of my theories in the NFL is that you see a lot of first-year coaches have success, and then they never replicate it. Like Adam Gase's first year in Miami went to the playoffs. Ben McAdoo, the first year with the Giants, went to the playoffs. Lots of bad coaches in this league have a good first season. And I think part of it's because like if you become a head coach, unless you're Jeff Ulbrich, you've had time to like actually think this through for years. You know, you've had time to think through, this is what I do. So you come out with a plan, and usually it works pretty well at the start. And then like after that first year, the rest of the league can kind of see and adjust to what you've been doing. And the second year, things don't work as well. The question is, you know, can you stay true to yourself? Can you fight through the struggles? And that's the issue with Woody Johnson. I mean, there are lots of issues with Woody Johnson, but that's one of the big ones is that the second there's an issue, Woody abandons the plan and Woody panics. And, you know, he starts making moves. And it's gotten way worse. You know, 3 years ago, I don't think I would be as critical as Woody Johnson as I am right now. This is the thing with Woody is like, and this is the alarming thing, is that the longer he's owned the team, the worse he's gotten. Like the first decade or so, the Jets were actually like pretty successful. You know, they never went to the Super Bowl, but like Jets were one of the more successful organizations in the league Woody's first decade owning the team. And then they've been bad since then. And the last 2-3 years, it's just been like, it's like he's like losing his mind. Like, and that's, you know, you worry about trajectory. It's just gotten worse and worse the longer Woody's on. It's like the opposite of a guy who learns the longer he's on the team. Woody like doesn't know anything. And this is the problem. And this is part of the problem is like Woody doesn't have any core convictions about how you build a good football team. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know what traits you need in a GM. He doesn't know what an organization needs. So that leads Woody to like be indecisive. It leads Woody to panic because if things are going wrong, he doesn't know what to look for. You know, if you have core insights into like how you build a winning organization, you can see like whether your GM is doing a good job. And if your GM is doing a good job, then you support him through the tough times. If he's not doing the things you need to do to build a winning team, then you look to make a change. Because Woody like doesn't know these things, because Woody doesn't know what to look for, you get like this bizarre like halfway thing where he keeps people in place, but like he starts making demands and he starts meddling. It's like the worst of all worlds. So all of this is to say, like, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Woody hired a GM with an analytical background because it'd be something new. You know, it always depends on like who's got Woody's ear at that moment. Maybe he's speaking with a friend of his that like says, well, analytics is the wave of the future. You know, Woody can be convinced of anything. The question is, the thing is, Woody can't be convinced to like stay the course. And the first time there's signs of trouble, the first time your GM does something that gets criticism from the media, because an analytical GM is not always going to do things traditionally. He's not always going to do things by the book. And when you don't do things by the book, you get criticized in the media. Well, would he stand by the GM? I think the answer to that is probably no. And that's one of the reasons, like, as much as I like Alec Hallaby, I do wonder a little bit, is he the right choice for this team? Because the second he does something that's unconventional that fails, Woody's going to take control, as he's done the last couple of years. And like I said, I mean, it just keeps getting worse. It's, if people say, if people say, well, it's a defensive Woody. People say, well, the Jets were pretty good. I didn't hear anybody complain in the first decade when Woody owned the team. Well, that was 15 years ago. We're really, I mean, have you seen what's happened lately? The guy's getting worse. So I don't know. I think part of the problem is, like, Woody will hire somebody to run analytics. He'll claim he buys in, but will he buy in? I kind of doubt it. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on a podcast, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.